Hello, I'm Shigeki Yamaguchi, a Senior Executive Vice President of NTT Data Corporation, and also CEO of NTT Data Institute of Management Consulting. In Japan, I have published 3 books on how digital technology changes the economy, management, and society. Currently, our main focus is assisting our client with their digital transformation efforts. We are also conducting research on advanced digital transformation, best practices globally. In order to gain valuable insight and foresight from them. Today, I would like to focus on the future of work in the digital age. How our digital technologies change our work, which is one of the key concerns for executives in digital transformation. As you may know, the pandemic has greatly impacted the way we work. With the advent of AI, the gig economy, and more recently, ChatGPT, we are facing a turning point in which we must reconsider not only our work style, but also the very value of work itself. In my third book, Digital Transformation and Learning Organization, I wrote about the necessary management and human resources for successful digital transformation, as well as the importance of creating a learning organization. However, I did not fully address how digital transformation will change our organization and the way we work. In the midst of this, I came across an intriguing book that discusses that the future of work will look like. The title of the book is Work Without Jobs, published in 2022. And just recently, in March 2023, a Japanese version of this book was published. This book describes how to reboot your organization's work operating system. In other words, it discusses how to face the accelerating environmental changes, design work, organizations, and actually transform them. The author describes, after reading this book, readers will be more prepared to successfully address emerging issues like automation, AI, and robotics, the gig economy, and the future of work. The author is Mr. Ravin Jestarson. He is a senior partner and global transformation leader at Mercer. He is a recognized global thought leader, futurist, and best-selling author on the future of work and workforce transformation. I believe that this book is very helpful for executives to practically implement their company's digital transformation strategy. Thank you for your time. Ravin-san, it's been great to see you again.
Likewise, Yamaguchi-san, it's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ravin-san. So, let's get started with the conversation right away. Today, I'd like to proceed with this agenda to understand the concept of work without jobs. In this book, Ravin-san explains the new work OS as a mechanism that allows organizations and individuals to tap into their capabilities without being bound by existing jobs or employment relationships. Understanding the concept of work without jobs requires a deep dive into this new work OS. I would like to explore in detail why it is necessary, what it is, and what kind of management and leadership is required to implement it. Let's start with the topic of why we need a new work OS. Ravin-san, I would like to know why you decided to write this book, Work Without Jobs. In your book, you argue the following. The traditional work OS based on jobs and job holders is too cumbersome and ill-suited to the future. We propose and describe a new work operating system that deconstruct jobs into their components and allows work to be perpetually reinvented by recombining these more granular elements. Could you please explain in detail the reason behind this idea?
Yes, I would be happy to, Yamaguchi-san. So if we go to the next slide, by way of context, my co-author John Boudreau and I started writing this book in March of 2020, right when the pandemic was hitting. And what we started to see was a significant acceleration in the forces that underpin the future of work. And there are two primary forces. One is certainly digitalization and automation. And we saw a massive spike in demand for digital solutions, new technologies. As you talked about, Yamaguchi-san, we've seen AI advance very dramatically the last couple of years, particularly the last 6 months. But the other force is also equally important, and that is what we call the democratization of work. Our growing ability to decouple work from its traditional confines of space, time, and structure. And when you bring those two forces together, what we're seeing is not a 2-year or 3-year acceleration in the future of work, but more like 20 years that have been pulled forward in this digital age that we are operating in. And when we look at the response that is called for from companies to adjust to and remain relevant in a world that is fundamentally different from the one that existed, in 2019, we see 3 primary things that are needing to be incorporated into the work equation. Certainly, our focus on driving efficiency, growth, and return will always be there. Those are the basic economics of the business. But increasingly, building a business model that is much more resilient, flexible, and agile, to be able to respond to threats like the pandemic, to be able to respond to opportunities as they emerge. And when we look at what it takes to respond to that, we see 5 key variables. One is leaders who have a portfolio-based approach to work, to be able to understand where does emerging automation have a competitive advantage over the talent we have, where might automation substitute certain types of human labor, where might it augment human labor, where might gig talent make more sense. Secondly, how do we think beyond the frictional cost of a job, which is too inflexible, too slow to react and respond, but to move instead to where talent can flow to work much more seamlessly? How do we have leaders who can make organizations which enable and empower leaders to make more decisions from the edges of the enterprise where innovation has its highest payoff, where digitalization is particularly critical, where threats like the pandemic are most acutely felt? And how do we also think about this work operating system not just being limited to individual companies, but enabling much greater connectivity between companies. We saw a lot of that, Yamaguchi-san, during the pandemic. We helped some airlines actually share their baggage handlers with the distribution centers of different retailers because of the close matching of the skills and the work. And then certainly, lastly, this pivot to Web 3.0, to generative AI, to the metaverse, and what that in turn means for the future of work. And what all of this leads us to is the need for a new currency for work, one that is made up of the elemental tasks and the skills and capabilities of both the talent and the automation or the machines, and not just jobs as the currency for work. And if we go to the next slide, and so when we look at the two most pivotal questions that we believe that business leaders will be wrestling with over the next 10 to 20 years, I think those two challenges fall into two buckets. One is, how do we redesign work to enable talent to flow to it as seamlessly as possible with the right tools, with AI as a work partner, all the while enabling that talent to keep reinventing itself as the demands for work and the demands on the organization change. So seamless matching of the demand for work, the supply for work, and the skills and capabilities required to do the work. And then secondly, as we think of that more agile enterprise, how do we ensure that the structure with which talent is connected to work is not a one-size-fits-most solution that might have worked maybe 140 years when this thing called a job was first invented, but we're able to meet more and more talent on their individual terms, recognizing that what you want from your work experience, Yamaguchi-san, versus what I want may be fundamentally different. But we have a more flexible structure that allows us all to connect with the mission of the organization on our individual terms. Now, if we go to the next slide, when we think about the future of work, I think it's important to define it, because certainly there has been a lot of attention the last 3 years focused on where work is done and when it's done, hybrid versus remote versus on-site. And certainly that's very important. But the reason this work operating system is essential is because it considers all 6 of the dimensions that we believe underpin the future of work. Certainly where work is done and when it's done, how is the work done? What is the work itself? How do we recombine different activities and tasks into constructs that make sense for both the company and the individual, as opposed to saying, this is the box that I call a job, and I need to get people to fit into that box. How do we create a much more permeable boundaries, if you will? And certainly the who of work, whether it's an employee in a job, an employee in an agile talent pool, a gig worker, generative AI, robotic process automation, all of those are new options for getting work. And how do we connect them seamlessly to the work? And then I think equally, as we see with so many parts of the world, the why of work. Why should I as an individual align my mission and purpose to yours as a company? And so all 6 of these dimensions are at play, and the work operating system that we talk about enables companies to sort of be much more thoughtful about how we create much smaller building blocks for work to address these different needs.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your ideas. I totally agree on Ravi-san's point. Even in our IT service industry, we have focused on where and when solutions that enable the flexible work styles. However, simply considering the work style of employee is not enough. We must also consider how to extract greater value from each individual employee and how to combine them as an organization. In thinking about the future of work, I believe that a deep understanding of digital technology is essential. Therefore, I would like to share my thoughts from the perspective of digital technology. I believe digital transforms management, communication, learning and development as well as work style. Before the development of digital technology, work looked like the picture on the left. Employees come to work in one office. They worked at fixed time and place. The structure of the organization was hierarchical. The manager's job was to order the work, and then the subordinates would finish the work within the scope of the job and report to their boss. Work assignments were fixed because they were within the scope of the job. In addition to that, employees rely on personal experience to do their work. However, the power of digital technology has changed this situation. After digital, employees can now work remotely and at any time they want. The structure of the organization is getting flat, and managers can check the team status directly from dashboards and reports on the cloud services. Work assignment is made without restriction of the job scope. Decisions are optimized based on data, not personal experience, and increasingly automated. Optimize. In practice, the applicability of these digital technologies depend on the characteristics of business. Executives need to understand the characteristics of their business and optimize their operations according to their strategies. So we just understood why we need a new work operating system. Now let's move on to the second topic. What is the new work operating system? Work without jobs. From your book, I understand the following. The basic concept is to deconstruct work into job elements, such as task or project, and to see workers as a full person through skills or capabilities, not just job holders. By implementing this concept, we understood we could make our work more seamless, efficient, equitable, and transparent. Ravin-san, could you please explain to us in a way that Japanese business leaders can understand how this new work operating system differs from conventional work operating system? Please.
Yes, absolutely, Yamaguchi-san. So if we go to the next slide, as you said, what we are seeing is when we talk about this new work operating system, we're seeing the currency for work fundamentally change from the currency that has existed for about 140 years in businesses all around the world, where the job was the currency for work, that one-to-one relationship between a person and a position, and some might also say between a degree, a person and a position, that one-to-one relationship with all of the inflexibility associated with the structure where people either move up or they move horizontally. and all built in an era of great predictability and stability, where if you think back to when the job was introduced, we were able to, the volatility in the global economy did not exist. When we had a different structure of governments and safety nets. In some cases, we didn't have safety nets. But the era in which things were built, capabilities were being built at very high fixed cost. And that was tolerable because of the ability to keep increasing prices. As we think about how digitalization is accelerated, how the democratization of information has accelerated, as we think about how globalization has increasingly driven greater volatility in the global economy. What we're seeing and what we talk about with this new work operating system is an operating model where it's not the job that is the currency for work, but increasingly it's skills and tasks. And so we go from that one-to-one relationship between a degree, a person, and a position to the many-to-many, between skills and work, and the many different nano and micro upskilling opportunities that we can deliver to talent on a real-time basis to close specific skill gaps as we see them and as they appear, as we understand changing demand signals for work and have a better picture of the supply of skills as manifest in our workforce. And this is where, going back to your points at the beginning, Yamaguchi-san, where digitalization is essential to enabling this transformation. It's because what we're now seeing to enable this change from this simplistic world of I either move up or laterally in a job depending on demand, to now you might have 25 different opportunities to contribute as the business model changes, as new work emerges based on insight into the work that is emerging and your skills and the interventions to close specific skill gaps. You could take your career in many different directions. And this is where AI becomes a really important part of the equation and a work partner, not just in executing the work as we're seeing with generative AI and other tools that we'll talk about in a second, but also in how talent is connected to work and how that talent grows and expresses itself over the course of the different evolving demand of an organization. And so if we go to the next slide, so against that changing relationship, when we think about this new work operating system and the higher degree of organizational agility that it affords companies to be able to respond to the disruptions I talked about, to be able to respond to the speed that the modern world of work is calling for, we identified 4 principles that were essential. One is ensure that we are starting with the work that needs to be done, not how we organize it today, not the organization structure that we have today, but what is the work that exists today and what's the work to come? And then asking the question, the second question is, what's the optimal combinations of humans versus automation in executing this work? As we know, AI is and will be a permanent feature in all of our lives, our personal and professional lives. So we need to answer that question in front. Where does automation maybe substitute highly repetitive rules-based work? Where might it augment the critical skills of the people you have? Maybe it's a creative designer where generative AI is helping her create a new commercial campaign for the company. And where does the presence of automation create demand for new skills, as we've seen with prompt writers, with script writers? Since, it's interesting, natural language is now the dominant programming language, right, for generative AI. So ensuring that we are asking and answering the question of the optimal combinations of humans and automation early, and then asking the question of, for the work that's going to be done by the humans or the talent, what's the best way to connect them to the work? In some areas, as we'll see in a second, yes, a job still makes sense, and there's some good reasons for it. But there are many more options. Should it be an employee in an agile talent pool flowing to work and opportunity because of the scarcity of her skills? Should it be a gig worker? Should it be an outsourcer? Depending on the economics, the cost, capabilities, and risks associated with different work arrangements. And then lastly, to the point you made at the beginning, when we talk about the need for an operating model that can perpetually reinvent itself, how do we ensure that we are creating an operating model that allows talent to flow to opportunities as they emerge? That we are not confining people to this thing called a job where they are stuck doing a set body of work, but instead, and I think in Japan in particular, you have a rich history of enabling your workforces to solve problems as they emerge, somewhat unlimited by the constraints of a job, but being able to think critically about issues as they emerge and then solve them with the resources and the teams that they have. And I think that's a discipline that many other companies, many other parts of the world could benefit from. So 4 principles that underpin this work operating system. And I want to maybe bring this to life a little bit. If we go to the next slide with a couple of things. One is when I talk about that second principle of getting to the optimal combinations of humans and automation, this was a framework that my co-author John and I developed in our third book, which was published by the Harvard Business Review, called Reinventing Jobs, and where we showed that the companies who lead with the work, as we talked about in step 1, in principle 1, got to much higher order outcomes than the companies who led with the technology, because they saw where the deconstructed activities, where they could be substituted versus augmented versus where the work was transformed. And so we think about step 2, it's really the analysis is what you see on this page. As we talked about, you deconstruct the work, categorizing the activities based on those steps, based on those 3 continuums in step 1, and then asking the question of what are we trying to solve for those activities. And what we've seen in about 4,000 examples in work we've done over almost 20 years is where the objective function is error elimination for certain types of activities, where the objective function might be variance minimization, like transaction processing, where the objective function might be to incrementally improve productivity, or where the objective function might be to achieve a breakthrough, like what we see with the world's best data scientists and R&D engineers, etc. Once we understand the work, then asking the question of what's the right type of automation? Should it be robotic process automation? Should it be cognitive automation or AI, whether that's machine learning, whether that's deep neural networks, generative AI, etc.? Should it be social robotics, which is equipment that is mobile with sensors and intelligence to be able to interact with humans and other machines? And then asking the question of, as we did in principle 3, what are the other work alternatives? If it's beyond automation, should we centralize work in shared services? Should we use gig workers? Should we use an agile talent pool where people might be employees, but they're connecting to work not through jobs, but by marketplaces? And then how do we ensure that as we see what work is substituted, what work is augmented by automation, and what new work is created, that we have clear upskilling and reskilling pathways so that talent can continuously stay relevant for the work that is emerging? And the last slide I want to share, which ties into the earlier point about creating a model of perpetual reinvention. If we go to the next slide, in the book, we talk about 3 ways through which talent can be connected to work. On the left is where we've been for, as we talked about, 140 years in the world of work. And there's still good reasons for why jobs will exist, despite the title of the book, because there are going to be compliance and control reasons. In certain industries like financial services, regulation manifests itself in a set of requirements for people in a job, a set of skills, a set of protocols. So the job will still be there, but for a much smaller percentage of work for the foreseeable future. And the infrastructure that enables that are our job architectures, workforce planning, etc. But where I think this gets interesting, Yamaguchi-san, is as we move to the right, where we're seeing many companies go from not just employees in fixed roles, but even though people might be employees, they are in flexible roles where they get to express their skills in other parts of the organization and where they get to acquire new skills by taking on projects and assignments. And this is where we see the infrastructure start to change. We see this thing called talent marketplaces, AI-driven technology that connects talent to work, starting to enter a lot more companies. And so you have in that middle model of flexibility, a hybrid structure where you have people in jobs, but they have the flexibility to go outside of their jobs, to take on projects, assignments, and gigs within the company. And then the model on the far right is what I like to think of as being agile on steroids. And this is where you have skills as the pure currency for work, skills and tasks. People might be employees, they might be gig workers, but they are connecting to work through projects, assignments, and gigs. You have the algorithm continuously nudging people to say, Yamaguchi-san, you've got these perfect skills for this opportunity, and we're going to connect you to this project. And when that project is done, we know what new skills you've acquired, and we're going to build on those skills and connect you to another project or an opportunity. So talent flowing to work as that work emerges, as their skills get enhanced, and continuously growing and developing in the flow of work. So I believe three models that we're already seeing with many companies that exist simultaneously, even though the shift is steadily from left to right.
Thank you for your clear explanation. I clearly understood the difference between the traditional work operating system and the new work operating system. And your framework of achieving optimal combination of humans and automations was so insightful that I think Japanese executives are able to get some helpful tips from you. With reference to this topic, let me also introduce the framework of NTT Data's Future of Work, Work Reinvention. We are organized work reinvention using digital technology like this slide. Ubiquitousness for flexible work styles. Autonomous agent which enables employees to shift from routine work to more value-added areas. Visualization, which helps managers to grasp the real-time status of the project. Personalization recommendation, which improve performance through support and recommendations tailored to individual employees. We will enhance our service suite to realize these concepts and lead our customers' digital transformation. Next, let's move on the topic of management and leadership. Up to this point, we have gained an understanding of the concept of a new business operating system. Now, I would like to ask you a final question, Ravin-san. My question is, how exactly do we adapt our organization to the new work operating system? In other words, what is the management and leadership needed to change the organization? Please share your thoughts on this with us.
Sure, I'd be happy to, Yamaguchi-san. As you correctly alluded to, the change we're talking about is a pretty significant one, from how organizations are designed, how work is constructed, and certainly how leaders and managers have traditionally expressed their roles. When we looked at the organizations in the many case studies we had in the book, what we saw were 5 fundamental changes in how managers and leaders behaved and made decisions. So if we go to the next slide, this starts to lay out the shifts that we're seeing. On the one hand, from how managers and leaders have always led with hierarchical authority, to where you think about this more agile operating environment, a lot more of the leadership is through influence. A lot more of the leadership is by empowerment and alignment of getting disparate, disconnected teams and individuals aligned to a common mission and purpose. And the leaders who we see do that exceptionally well don't rely on hierarchical authority to control. Rather, what they do is they build consensus, they build teams, they align many different disparate entities and teams to that common mission and purpose. The other thing that they do, going back to something we talked about a couple of times and you talked about as well in terms of digitalization and automation, is they understand the consequences of their choices, particularly in an era where there are so many options associated with automation. Yes, there are many things we could technically automate, where we could substitute or augment certain types of work, but asking the question of what is the humanistic response? What is the longer term consequence of that automation decision? And does that decision result in the right outcome, not just in terms of lower cost today, but in terms of a more sustainable, resilient, agile business model tomorrow? And I think this is particularly true when we look at the impact of generative AI and what that means for talent pipelines in many industries. The third dimension to this, as we look at the growing interest and focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, is recognizing that DEI today in a job-based construct is only focused on episodically. We think of DEI when we hire someone, when we change his or her pay, when we promote them, etc. But when you've got a more agile construct where talent is connecting to work through literally hundreds of projects over the course of the year, what we're seeing as companies use AI as a work partner is the ability to keep addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion, not once or twice a career, but literally with every single project and assignment. As people are being staffed on projects, is the team diverse? Are we elevating people so that we're diversifying the team? Do we have a skills-based pay architecture that automatically corrects for pay equity issues? And so again, having this construct where skills and tasks are the currency for work lets us have the opportunity to address diversity, equity, and inclusion. The question is, do we have leaders who have the skills to do that? I think something you've said at the beginning, we have asked leaders to be digitally savvy for a long time. I don't think that's enough anymore. We need leaders who have real technological fluency, who have a detailed understanding of emerging capabilities like generative AI, their application, not just in terms of text, but in terms of multiple different domains, as we're seeing. So a much deeper level of knowledge in terms of specifically AI, but also the enabling infrastructure. And then probably the biggest shift, I think, for many leaders is from thinking about a model of process execution where I connect talent to processes, to increasingly a more agile construct where work needs to be connected to talent, and increasingly through projects. I want to maybe end with 2 examples, Yamaguchi-san, to just illustrate 2 organizations who I believe are leading the new work operating system in an optimal way. So if we go to the next slide, one of those organizations is Unilever. Unilever is a company that I've had the privilege of working with since 2017. I helped them develop their framework for the future of work. And their whole mission was around creating more of a human network for work, a human network that was connected through emerging technologies that enabled the seamless deployment of talent to work. And many of their efforts came to a head during the early months of the pandemic, where as they rolled out their internal marketplace, it allowed them to make this shift to this new work operating model. They saw some significant gains, as you can see on this page, but it also started this movement towards a much more agile way of working that has become the hallmark of how they organize work and how they connect talent to work and how they create more meaningful work experiences for all of their talent around the world. Today, all 65,000 of their white-collar talent has the opportunity to take on projects in other parts of the organization, has the opportunity to create projects that allow their colleagues to connect to work. And so a construct for work that is radically different. So this is, to me, a good example of that flexible model in place of the three models we talked about. And then the last example I'd like to share is, if we go to the next slide, this is another case study in the book, just like Unilever. And it's of a global insurer that we worked with, where they were struggling with the deployment of their digital talent across their business model. And they started with their data scientists who were captive within a very traditional structure within one particular job family. And what they saw was the talent was unhappy, and data science work that was required across other parts of the organization was not being done. And so they pulled all the talent out of this job family and created a global agile pool. And the talent now would connect to work through projects and assignments and gigs. Managers had to learn how to redesign work, because the normal reaction of a manager operating in a function or a silo is, if I need work done, I either delegate the work to someone on my team or I open a new requisition to hire someone. Now they have to redesign work, learn how to construct projects, and then work within the algorithm that's going to connect the right talent to the project. And the lesson learned from this company was they saw a 600% gain in the productivity of their data scientists as a result of this shift, and have now applied this model not just to their data scientists, but all their digital roles, whether it's DevOps, whether it's UI, UX design, etc. So two examples of this operating model in practice, if you will.
Thank you for the excellent presentation. I have come to realize that introducing a new work operating system into an organization requires a different mindset than what we have been accustomed to. I'd like to further elaborate on this topic. In reality, it is not easy to introduce new structures and ways of thinking into an organization. In order to successfully implement a new system, leaders must first understand the differences between the old and the new systems and change their management approach accordingly. This slide shows the framework we created as we drive a digital transformation. We ordinarily had a hierarchical management that was optimized to ensure the quality of our IT systems. However, we have shifted to agile business management style based on the features required of a digital business. Building an organization is not the end. We have to make it work. In agile organizations, having a common vision is important because many members need to collaborate effectively in a short period of time. Having a common vision allows a flat organization to operate autonomously. Let me explain in more detail. The left side of the diagram is the challenge we faced in an agile organization. Having multiple teams may create partial optimization problem. When developing in agile, some members become short-term oriented by focusing too much on short-term development goals, and not caring about the long-term objectives. Each member may also feel a gap in their work and organization vision. To handle these challenges, leaders and managers need to take these initiatives to instill a vision in the organization and run the work operating system well. I found the following description in Work Without Jobs. Purpose-led work. The success of a system of work without jobs will rest increasingly on leaders and managers who consistently lead themselves and others with purpose. I totally agree on this idea. In terms of achieving a company's objectives, needless to say, we have to deliver business outcomes. Linking the organization strategy with the new working operating system is critical to improve employee performance and deliver business outcomes. I believe that a learning organization with a shared vision that motivates and engages team members can act as a middleware like between working operating system and strategy. We have to realize this concept by leveraging digital technology in order to generate client business outcomes. Thank you for the excellent discussion based on Work Without Jobs. I could learn about your book on a more detailed level, which helped to clarify your theoretical concept. Finally, could you please share a message and some advice for business leaders?
Absolutely, Yamaguchi-san. It's been a pleasure to be here with you. I would say that, the ideas we talk about have real potential. They have real potential to transform your business, but they also require you to experiment, because what we're talking about is a change that maybe challenges many of your long-held beliefs about how to run a company and how to organize work and connect people to work. And so I would say, identify some areas of opportunity where you have a bottleneck in the process, where you have a digital challenge, if you will, where you can experiment and try these ideas and see the benefits you gain from them by rapid prototyping. I promise you, you won't be disappointed. I promise you, you will realize the sorts of gains that I talked about with some of the case studies and many others. But I think it's an opportunity for you to sort of experiment and try this, and then start to instill it into your leadership routines and your management disciplines within the organization.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the good dialogue. I'm very glad to talk about your book, Work Without Jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Yamaguchi-san. It's a pleasure being here with you.
Thank you.